I took the job at the Cascade Cinema 3 weeks after my landlord told me rent was going up another $200 a month. It wasn't much of a choice. The theater sat on the edge of Ridgemont, population 8,000, in a building that had probably been there since the 70s. Faded red brick. A marquee missing half its bulbs. The kind of place that somehow survived despite every reason it shouldn't. The manager who hired me was named Paul. He was somewhere in his 50s, with the kind of face that looked tired even when he smiled. We met in his office on a Wednesday afternoon, and he didn't ask me many questions. Just wanted to know if I could work nights, if I had reliable transportation, and if I was okay with cleaning. I told him yes to all three. Good, he said, leaning back in his chair. We need someone consistent. Last guy didn't work out. I didn't ask why. I needed the job. He walked me through the building that same day. The Cascade had 6 screening rooms total, though he said they only used 4 of them regularly. The lobby was bigger than I expected, with worn burgundy carpeting and a concession stand that looked original to the building. Everything smelled like popcorn and industrial cleaner. The walls were decorated with framed movie posters, most of them sun-faded and peeling at the corners. Paul showed me the supply closet, the break room, the bathroom. He explained the closing procedures, how to lock up, where the alarm panel was, which lights to leave on overnight. Standard stuff. His voice had a rehearsed quality to it, like he'd given this tour 100 times. We've got a good crew here, he said as we walked down the main hallway. Small but good, everyone pulls their weight. The hallway stretched longer than I'd expected. Doors on either side leading to the different auditoriums. The carpet here was darker, navy blue with gold geometric patterns, and the walls were painted a color, somewhere between beige and gray. Sconce lighting ran along both sides, but only half the bulbs worked, creating alternating pools of light and shadow. Theaters 1 through 4 are your main responsibility, Paul said, gesturing as we passed each door. You'll clean those after the last showing each night. Vacuum, wipe down seats, check for trash, the usual. Theater 5 is storage, we don't use it anymore. He paused at the end of the hallway. One more door sat on the left side, unmarked, except for the number 6 in tarnished brass letters. Theater 6, Paul said, not looking at it. You don't need to worry about that one. I glanced at the door. It looked the same as the others. Storage too? No, we still show films in there sometimes. He started walking back toward the lobby. Just not your responsibility. Someone else handles it. The way he said it made me want to ask more questions, but he'd already moved on to explaining the schedule. I'd be working Tuesday through Saturday, 6 p.m. to close, sometimes later if there were issues. Minimum wage plus tips from the tip jar, which he admitted wasn't much. I started that Friday. The first week was exactly what I expected. I worked mostly with a girl named Stephanie, who ran the concession stand, and a guy named Marcus, who handled the projection booth. Stephanie was 19, studying at the community college 30 minutes away. Marcus was older, maybe late 20s, and didn't talk much. There was also Janet, who worked the box office on weekends, and Tom, the other closing manager who rotated shifts with Paul. The work itself was mindless. Tear tickets when we got busy, help at concessions during rushes, clean the theaters between showings. The audiences were small, sometimes a dozen people total across all 4 active screens. Friday and Saturday nights were better, but even then we rarely filled more than one auditorium. I liked the quiet. After the last showing ended, usually around 10:30 or 11, the building would empty out fast. Stephanie would close down concessions while I grabbed the cleaning cart and started making rounds. Marcus would shut down the projection equipment and disappear. The managers would count registers and do paperwork. By midnight, I was usually alone in the building except for whoever was managing that night. The first time I noticed Theater 6 was my third shift. I was cleaning Theater 4, vacuuming the aisles in the mechanical darkness that comes after the house lights go down. We kept them dimmed during cleaning to save on electricity. The emergency exit signs provided most of the light, glowing red above the doors, along with my flashlight clipped to the cleaning cart. I'd just finished the back rows when I heard a sound from the hallway, a door opening, then closing, footsteps on carpet. I turned off the vacuum and listened. The footsteps were slow, measured. They moved down the hallway away from the lobby. Then another door opened and closed, and the sound stopped. I waited a moment, then went back to vacuuming. Probably Marcus or whoever was managing. People moved around the building all the time during closing, but when I finished Theater 4 and pushed my cart back into the hallway, I saw Tom coming from the opposite direction, carrying a clipboard. He nodded at me. "How's it going?" he asked. "Good, almost done." He glanced at his watch. "You're making good time." I hesitated, then asked, "Was someone else just down here? I thought I heard footsteps." Tom's expression didn't change. "Might have been Marcus. He checks the projection equipment sometimes." "Yeah, probably." He looked down at his clipboard. "You good to finish up Theaters 2 and 3? I'll be in the office if you need anything." "Sure." He walked past me toward the lobby, and I pushed the cart toward Theater 2. But I found myself glancing down the hallway toward Theater 6. The door was closed. The brass number 6 caught the light from the nearest sconce. I'd walked past that door a dozen times over the past week, and I'd never seen anyone go in or out. The next night, Saturday, was busier. We actually had a decent crowd for the 8 o'clock showing of some superhero movie. Stephanie and I both worked concessions during the rush, scooping popcorn and pouring sodas, while a line of people waited with varying degrees of patience. Marcus appeared briefly to fix a problem with one of the projectors, then vanished again. I'd learned that was his way. He communicated mostly through brief statements of fact and long periods of absence. After the crowds filtered into their respective theaters, Stephanie and I cleaned up the concession area. She was telling me about some drama in one of her classes, something about a group project going wrong, when Paul emerged from his office. "Stephanie, can you handle things up here for a bit?" he asked. "I need to borrow them for something." She shrugged. "Yeah, sure." I followed Paul down the main hallway. He moved with purpose, his keys jangling on his belt. We passed Theaters 1 through 4, then 5. He stopped in front of Theater 6. "Need you to help me bring something in from storage," he said, unlocking the door. He pushed it open, and I got my first look inside. The layout was the same as the other auditoriums, rows of seats descending toward a screen, emergency exits on either side, the same burgundy and navy color scheme. But the air smelled different. Stale, but not in the way of the other theaters. Like the ventilation didn't run the same way the house lights were on, which was unusual. In that brightness, I could see the seats more clearly. They looked older than the ones in the other theaters. The upholstery was a darker red, almost maroon, and the fabric had a worn, pilled texture. "This way," Paul said, walking down the aisle toward the front. I followed him, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The screen at the front was pulled up slightly, revealing a door underneath that I guessed led to the backstage area most old theaters had. Paul opened that door and stepped through. Behind the screen was exactly what I expected. A narrow storage space with concrete floors and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. Boxes were stacked along one wall, most of them labeled with years that went back further than I'd been alive. "Help me with this," Paul said, pointing to a wheeled cart loaded with equipment I didn't recognize. We maneuvered it out from behind the screen, through the auditorium and back into the hallway. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes. Paul locked the door to Theater 6 behind us, and we wheeled the cart down to Theater 5, where apparently it was supposed to live. "Thanks," he said when we finished. "Head back up front. I'm sure Stephanie's ready for her break." I nodded and started back toward the lobby. But I found myself thinking about Theater 6. The air in there, the smell, the seats that looked different from the others. That night during closing, I was cleaning Theater 3 when I heard the footsteps again. Same pattern as before, a door opening. Slow footsteps moving down the hallway. Another door, farther away, opening and closing. I turned off the vacuum and stepped into the hallway. Empty. The lights hummed quietly. Somewhere in the building, the HVAC system cycled on with a low rumble. I walked down the hallway toward Theater 6. The door was closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, listening. Nothing. I reached for the handle, then stopped. Paul had locked it earlier. I'd watched him do it. And even if it was open, I didn't have a good reason to go inside. I was supposed to be cleaning Theater 3. I went back to work. But the footsteps bothered me. Not because they were scary, they weren't, but because I couldn't figure out who was making them. Tom was managing that night, and he'd been in the office doing paperwork. Marcus had already left. Stephanie had gone home right after her shift ended. Unless Paul had come back. But I'd watched him leave at 9. I finished cleaning and found Tom in the office counting receipts. "Hey," I said from the doorway. "Did Paul come back tonight?" Tom looked up. "No, why?" "Just thought I heard someone walking around. Probably the building settling. Place makes all kinds of noise." He went back to counting. "You finished already?" "Yeah, good. Go ahead and clock out. I'll lock up." I clocked out and drove home, but the question stayed with me. The second week was quieter. Attendance dropped off after the weekend rush, and by Tuesday we were back to mostly empty theaters. I settled into the rhythm of the job. Show up at 6, help with concessions if needed, clean between showings, close down at night. I started noticing small things about the building. The way certain sections of carpet were more worn than others, creating paths that marked decades of foot traffic. The water stain on the ceiling near Theater 2 that looked like a face if you tilted your head right. The particular smell of each auditorium. Theater 1 smelled like artificial butter. Theater 3 had a faint mildew note. Theater 4 smelled mostly like nothing. I still hadn't been inside Theater 6 again. But I'd started paying attention to it, watching to see who went in and out. The problem was, I never saw anyone. The door stayed closed. Yet Paul had said they still showed films in there sometimes, and I definitely heard someone walking around down there during closing. On Thursday night, I worked with Janet at the box office because Stephanie had an exam. Janet was in her 40s, pleasant in a distant sort of way. She'd worked at the Cascade for 6 years, which made her the senior employee besides Paul. During a lull, I asked her about Theater 6. "Oh, we don't use that one much anymore," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Special showings only." "What kind of special showings?" She shrugged. "Private rentals, birthday parties sometimes, that kind of thing." "Do we have one coming up?" "Not that I know of." She glanced at the clock. "Show's starting in a few minutes. You should probably get ready to clean Theater 1. The conversation ended there, but something about her answer bothered me. Not what she said, but how she said it. Too casual, like she was giving me an explanation she'd given before, one that sounded right but didn't actually mean anything. That night after the last showing, I was cleaning Theater 2 when I decided to check the schedule. We kept a master calendar in the office that listed all the showings, including private rentals. Tom was on his break, sitting in his car in the parking lot where he liked to smoke. I slipped into the office and found the calendar on the wall behind the desk. I flipped back through the past few months. Theaters 1 through 4 had regular showings marked in blue ink. Theater 5 was always blank. Storage, like Paul had said. Theater 6 had 3 dates marked in red ink. No times, no movie titles, just dates. The most recent one was 2 weeks ago before I'd started working there. I heard the back door open, Tom coming back inside, and quickly stepped out of the office. "Finished already?" he asked, walking past me. "Almost. Just need to get Theater 4. He nodded and went into the office. I grabbed my cleaning cart and headed back down the hallway, my mind working through what I'd seen. 3 showings in 3 months. That could match what Janet said about special events. But why no details? Every other showing on the calendar listed the movie title and runtime. The entries for Theater 6 were just dates, marked in different ink. I finished cleaning and clocked out, but I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while before driving home. The Cascade looked different at night, with most of the lights off and the marquee glowing weakly in the darkness. The building had a presence to it. Not threatening exactly, just heavy. Like it was full of something that didn't empty out when the people left. The weekend came and went. I worked my regular shifts. The building was busy enough that I didn't have time to think about Theater 6 or mysterious footsteps or calendars marked in red ink. But Sunday night, after we closed, something happened that changed things. I was taking trash to the dumpster out back, pushing through the emergency exit near Theater 4, with a bag in each hand. The door opened onto a small concrete pad that led to the parking lot. The dumpster sat against the back wall of the building, tucked behind a privacy fence that had seen better days. It was raining. Not hard, but steady. The kind of late autumn rain that promised winter wasn't far off. I tossed the bags into the dumpster and turned to head back inside. That's when I noticed the light. One of the emergency exit doors farther down the building was glowing red from the inside, which was normal. But as I watched, the door opened slightly, just a few inches. Light spilled out onto the wet concrete. Then it closed again. I stood there in the rain, watching, waiting to see if someone would come out. Nothing. After a minute, I walked along the back of the building toward that exit. The rain soaked through my work shirt. My shoes splashed in puddles that had formed in the uneven concrete. The exit door had a small window at eye level, reinforced with wire mesh. I looked through it. Theater 6. I was looking into Theater 6 from the emergency exit. The house lights were on. The seats were empty. Everything looked normal, except the door had definitely opened. I'd seen it. I tried the handle. Locked from the inside like it was supposed to be. I went back inside through the exit near Theater 4, dripping water on the carpet. Tom was in the lobby, turning off lights. "You fall in a puddle?" he asked when he saw me. "Just taking out trash? Hey, is anyone still here besides us?" "No, why?" "I thought I saw one of the emergency exits open." Tom paused, his hand on a light switch. "Which one?" "The one by Theater 6. Something crossed his face. Not quite alarmed, but close to it. "Those doors stick sometimes, especially when it rains. The building shifts. It looked like someone opened it." "From inside?" "Yeah." He flipped the light switch, plunging part of the lobby into darkness. "Building's empty. I already checked." He looked at me directly for the first time. "You checked all the theaters during cleaning, right? Made sure no one was sleeping in there or anything?" "Yeah, they were all empty." "Then it was the door sticking." He grabbed his jacket from behind the concession stand. "You good to finish closing? I need to get going." I wanted to push back, to insist I'd seen what I'd seen. But Tom was already heading toward the door, keys in hand. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." He left, and I was alone in the building. I stood there in the lobby, water dripping from my clothes onto the carpet, and listened to the silence. The building wasn't quiet. It was never actually quiet. The HVAC system hummed. The old pipes knocked and settled. Rain drummed against the glass doors at the entrance. Somewhere a fluorescent light ballast buzzed with electrical interference. But under all that, the building felt empty, the way places feel when you're the only person inside them. I finished the closing procedures, shut off the remaining lights, and armed the alarm system. Then I left through the front entrance, locking the door behind me. My car was the only one in the parking lot. I sat inside with the engine running, heater on, wipers clearing the rain from the windshield in rhythmic sweeps. The Cascade looked back at me through the darkness. Most of the windows were black. The marquee flickered. I thought about the emergency exit door opening, about the footsteps I'd heard, about Theater 6 with its different seats and stale air. Then I put the car in gear and drove home. I didn't work again until Tuesday. I spent my days off trying not to think about the theater, which mostly worked. I paid my rent, bought groceries, applied to a few other jobs online just to see what was out there, though nothing paid better than the Cascade and my schedule. But Tuesday evening, when I pulled into the parking lot and saw the building waiting there, something in my chest tightened. I sat in my car for a moment looking at the place. It was just a job, an old building, some weird quirks, sure, but every place had those. I was letting my imagination run away from me, seeing patterns that weren't there. I went inside. Paul was working that night. He was in his office when I arrived, and he barely looked up when I knocked to let him know I was there. "Slow night," he said. "Probably stay slow all week. Thanksgiving's coming up? People don't go to movies before Thanksgiving?" I clocked in and helped Stephanie set up concessions, though we both knew we probably wouldn't need much. She was in a quiet mood, focused on her phone between tasks. The first showing started at 7, 8 people, total across 2 movies. I cleaned Theater 1 after the early showing ended, then had nothing to do for 2 hours until the late shows finished. Stephanie left at 9:30. Paul stayed in his office. Marcus was somewhere in the building, probably in the projection booth, though I hadn't seen him. Around 10, I decided to walk the building. Not for any specific reason, just to move around. I took the main hallway down past the theaters. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. The sconce lighting created those familiar pools of shadow. I stopped in front of Theater 6. The door was closed. The brass number 6 needed polishing. I listened. Nothing at first. Then very faintly I heard something, a low hum, barely audible. It could have been the HVAC system, but it seemed to be coming from inside the theater. I tried the door handle, locked. I kept listening. The hum continued, steady and low. It reminded me of the sound a projector made when it was running, but deeper, more resonant. Footsteps behind me made me turn. Marcus was standing there, maybe 10 feet away. I hadn't heard him approach. "You need something?" he asked. His voice was flat, neutral. "No, just walking around. It's slow tonight." He looked at the door to Theater 6, then back at me. "You should probably stay up front in case anyone comes in." "Yeah, okay." I walked past him, back toward the lobby. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was still standing there watching me. I spent the rest of the shift behind the concession stand, scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore the unease that had settled in my stomach. At 11, the last showing ended. I cleaned theaters 2 and 4 while Paul did his closing paperwork. Marcus had already left, or at least his car wasn't in the parking lot when I checked. By 11:30, I was done. Paul was still in the office, so I knocked to let him know I was leaving. "Hey," I said from the doorway, "I'm finished. Anything else you need?" He looked up from his desk. Papers were spread out in front of him, and his computer monitor glowed with what looked like spreadsheets. "No, you're good. See you Thursday." I hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What's the deal with Theater 6? His expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" "Nobody ever goes in there, but it's locked, and people act weird when I ask about it." Paul leaned back in his chair. "It's not part of your job responsibilities, that's all." "But what is it for?" "Special showings, private events. We don't do them often." He looked back at his computer screen. "It's not something you need to worry about?" "I heard someone in there the other night or near it, footsteps. Probably Marcus. He has access to all the theaters. Marcus already left. Then it was me, or the building settling. Look." He met my eyes again. "I appreciate you taking the job seriously, but Theater 6 isn't your concern. Clean theaters 1 through 4. That's what you're here for, okay?" The conversation was over. I could hear it in his tone. "Okay," I said. I clocked out and left. But driving home, I kept thinking about how Paul had looked at me. Not angry, not dismissive, something else. He'd looked worried. The next few shifts were normal. As normal as things got at the Cascade anyway. I worked Thursday and Friday, both quiet nights. Stephanie and I talked about our classes. Janet worked the box office and made small talk about the weather. Tom managed Friday night and spent most of it in the office. I didn't ask anyone else about Theater 6. I didn't walk down that hallway unless I had to. I did my job and went home. But I couldn't stop noticing things. Like how Marcus always seemed to be near the hallway to the theaters, even when he didn't have an obvious reason to be there. How conversations would pause when I approached, then resume in slightly different directions. How Paul locked his office door now, which he hadn't done during my first week. And the sounds. I kept hearing them during closing shifts, footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing when I was supposed to be alone. Once, very faintly, I heard what sounded like voices, but so muffled I couldn't tell where they were coming from. I told myself I was being paranoid. The building was old. Old buildings made noise. People were weird sometimes. That didn't mean anything sinister was happening. But I started paying attention to the calendar in the office. I'd check it whenever I had a chance, looking for new dates, marked in red. A week after I'd first asked Paul about Theater 6, a new date appeared. December 3rd. No other information, just the date, written in red ink. That was a Saturday. I was scheduled to work that night. I thought about asking Paul what the showing was for, but I already knew he wouldn't tell me. Whatever happened in Theater 6, they didn't want regular employees to know about it, which raised the question, why? The Cascade was a movie theater. We showed movies. Sometimes people rented out auditoriums for private parties or corporate events. That was normal, so why the secrecy? I spent the days leading up to December 3rd trying to convince myself I didn't care. It wasn't my business. I needed the job. The smart thing to do was keep my head down and collect my paychecks. But I knew I was going to try to see what was happening in Theater 6. I just needed to be careful about it. December 3rd was cold and clear. I got to the Cascade at 6, same as always. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there was a car I didn't recognize parked near the back entrance, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Inside, Paul was working with Janet at the box office. Stephanie was setting up concessions. Marcus was presumably in the projection booth. Everything seemed normal. I clocked in and started my usual routine: help with concessions, clean up after early showings, wait around during the gaps between films. But I kept watching for anything unusual. At 7:30, a group of people arrived. 4 of them, all adults, dressed in irregular clothes, jeans, sweaters, jackets. They didn't go to the box office. Instead, Paul met them in the lobby and walked them directly down the hallway toward the theaters. I was behind the concession stand with Stephanie. She didn't seem to notice them, or if she did, she didn't react. "Hey," I said quietly. "Who are those people?" She glanced toward the hallway. "What people?" "The ones Paul just walked back there with." "I didn't see anyone." She went back to wiping down the counter. I stared at her. She'd been standing right next to me. There was no way she'd missed them. "You really didn't see them?" I asked. Stephanie paused, then looked at me directly. "I mind my own business. You should too." She'd never spoken to me like that before. Her tone wasn't hostile exactly, more like a warning. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, Paul came back to the lobby alone. "How's it going up here?" he asked. "Fine," Stephanie said. He nodded and went into his office, closing the door behind him. I wanted to walk down the hallway to see if those people had gone into Theater 6. But Stephanie was watching me now, even though she was pretending not to. So I waited. At 8 o'clock, I told Stephanie I needed to use the bathroom. She shrugged, and I headed down the main hallway. The bathroom was past Theaters 1 and 2, on the right side. I went inside, counted to 30, then came back out. The hallway was empty. I walked quietly toward Theater 6. The door was closed, but light showed through the gap at the bottom. Someone was definitely in there. I moved closer, trying to hear anything from inside. At first, nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard a sound. Not voices, something else. A rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, but mechanical, and under that, a low drone that made the air feel thick. I stood there, listening, trying to identify what I was hearing. Then the door handle moved. I jerked back, turned, and walked quickly toward the lobby. Behind me, I heard the door to Theater 6 open. Footsteps entered the hallway. I didn't look back. I went straight to the concession stand, where Stephanie was refilling the nacho cheese warmer. "That was fast," she said. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice level. "Yeah, A few minutes later, the 4 people I'd seen earlier walked past the concession stand and out the front doors. They didn't speak to anyone. Paul emerged from his office to watch them leave, then returned without a word. The rest of the night proceeded normally. I cleaned theaters after the late showings. Paul did his paperwork. By midnight, I was finished and ready to leave. But before I clocked out, I made a decision. I went to the supply closet and grabbed a spare key ring from the hook where we kept them. The keys were labeled with pieces of masking tape: projection, storage, Theater 1, Theater 2, and so on. There was no key labeled Theater 6, but there was one labeled Master, which wasn't supposed to leave the building. Managers used it, I pocketed it. Paul was in the office with the door closed. I clocked out, called out goodbye, and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the master key heavy in my pocket. What I was planning was stupid. I could get fired. Worse, if there really was something wrong with Theater 6, something dangerous, I could get hurt. But I'd already made up my mind. I drove home, ate dinner, and waited until 1 a.m. Then I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and drove back to the Cascade. The building was dark when I arrived. The parking lot was empty. Rain had started to fall again, light but persistent. I parked on the street instead of the lot, then walked around to the back entrance near Theater 4. I knew the alarm code. I'd watched Tom and Paul enter it enough times. The master key unlocked the back door. Inside, the emergency lighting cast everything in dim red. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the building. The HVAC hummed. Water ran through pipes somewhere in the walls. Otherwise, silence. I closed the door quietly behind me and moved into the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps. I kept my flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust to the red-tinted darkness. The emergency exit signs provided enough light to navigate. I passed Theater 4, then 3. The doors were closed, the auditorium's dark. Theater 6 was ahead. I approached slowly, my heart beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The door was closed. I tried the handle first, just in case. Locked. I pulled out the master key. My hands were shaking slightly. I told myself it was just adrenaline, that I wasn't actually scared. I was lying. The key slid into the lock. I turned it and the mechanism clicked. The door opened. The air that came out was cold, much colder than it should have been, and it smelled wrong. Not stale, like I'd noticed before, but chemical, like ozone after a lightning strike. I stepped inside, pulling the flashlight from my pocket but not turning it on yet. The emergency lighting from the hallway spilled into the auditorium enough for me to see the basic layout. Rows of seats descending toward the screen. Emergency exits on either side, their signs glowing red. Everything looked normal. I took another step inside, and the door swung closed behind me with a soft click. The darkness was immediate and total. I fumbled for the flashlight, found the switch, and turned it on. The beam cut through the black illuminating seats, carpet, walls. Normal? It all looked normal. I moved down the aisle slowly, sweeping the flashlight back and forth. The seats were definitely older than in the other theaters. The upholstery was worn in places, showing the padding underneath. Some of the armrests had scratches or gouges in them. I reached the front row and turned to look back at the auditorium. The screen was behind me. The door I'd entered through was at the top of the aisle. Everything was where it should be. But the air was still wrong, cold and sharp. And now that I was inside, I could hear something. The same rhythmic thumping I'd heard earlier, but fainter, like it was coming from somewhere else in the building. No, not in the building, under it. I turned toward the screen and approached the small door I'd seen Paul use when we'd moved that equipment. The door that led behind the screen. It was unlocked. I opened it and shined my flashlight into the space beyond. The backstage area was smaller than I remembered. Concrete floor, exposed pipes, stacked boxes. But on the far wall there was another door. I'd been in this space before. I hadn't noticed that door then. Or had I? I tried to remember. Paul had been talking, directing me to grab the cart. I'd been focused on not tripping over anything. I might have missed it. The door was metal, industrial looking, with a push bar handle, no window. I crossed the backstage area and stood in front of it. The thumping sound was louder here, definitely coming from beyond this door. I put my hand on the push bar. Then I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. In the auditorium behind me, I turned off the flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. Through the open door to the backstage area, I could see into the auditorium. It was dark, but the emergency exit signs provided just enough red light to make out shapes. Someone was walking down the aisle, slowly, methodically, checking the rows. I couldn't see who it was, just a silhouette moving through the darkness. They reached the front row and stopped. I held perfectly still. After a moment, the figure turned and walked back up the aisle. I heard the door to the hallway open and close. I waited in the darkness, counting my heartbeats. When I was sure whoever it was had left, I turned my flashlight back on and returned to the auditorium. Empty. I went to the hallway door and listened. Nothing. I needed to leave. Whoever that had been, they might come back. Or they might check the security footage and see that someone had entered the building. But I'd come this far. I went back to the metal door behind the screen. The thumping continued, steady and low. I pushed the handle and opened the door. A stairway led down into darkness. Concrete steps, metal railing. The walls were unpainted cinder block. The thumping was much louder now, and I could hear something else. A mechanical whir, like motors running. I descended the stairs slowly, keeping one hand on the railing. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom was a hallway. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, but only some of them worked, creating the same alternating pattern of light and shadow I'd seen upstairs. The hallway stretched about 20 feet before ending at another metal door. The thumping and whirring came from beyond it. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing slightly. At the door, I paused. There was a small window set into it, the glass reinforced with wire mesh. I looked through. The room beyond was large, maybe the size of the auditorium above. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with pipes and ductwork. Fluorescent lights hung on chains, casting harsh shadows. In the center of the room stood a machine. I'd never seen anything like it. It was roughly cylindrical, maybe 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, made of metal and glass and components I couldn't identify. Cables ran from it in all directions, some disappearing into the floor, others connecting to equipment mounted on the walls. The machine was running. Parts of it rotated slowly. Lights flickered across what looked like a control panel. The thumping sound came from it, along with the mechanical whir. But what made me step back from the window, what made my breath catch in my throat, was what surrounded the machine. The walls of the room were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were pinned up in overlapping layers, creating a collage that covered every available surface. And they were all of the same thing. People sitting in Theater 6. I pressed closer to the window, trying to see more clearly. The photographs showed the auditorium from different angles, from the back, from the sides, from the front, looking up the aisle. In every image, people sat in the seats. Different people, different numbers, different arrangements. But something was wrong with the images. The people in them looked blurred. Not like the photos were out of focus, but like the people themselves were somehow indistinct. Their edges were soft, their features unclear, and in some of the photographs, the seats were empty except for dark stains on the upholstery. I realized I was shaking. What the hell was this? What was that machine? Why were there photographs of people in Theater 6? I needed to get out. This was beyond anything I'd imagined. This wasn't just a weird room or a strange policy. This was something else entirely. I turned to leave and nearly screamed. Marcus was standing at the top of the stairs. He descended slowly, his footsteps measured and calm. His face was expressionless. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I backed away, my mind racing. I heard a noise. I was checking. "You should leave now." He reached the bottom of the stairs and stood between me and the exit. "You shouldn't come back." "What is that?" I gestured toward the door with the window. "What is this place?" "Not your concern." "There's a machine down here and photographs of people." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "This is your only warning. Leave now. Don't talk about what you saw. Keep coming to work, do your job, stay away from Theater 6. "Or what?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his expression. Not anger or fear, something worse. Pity. "Or you'll end up like them," he said, nodding toward the door. I didn't wait to ask what he meant. I pushed past him and ran up the stairs. Behind me, he called out, "Remember what I said?" I burst through the door into the backstage area, then into the auditorium. I ran up the aisle, threw open the door to the hallway, and sprinted toward the back exit. The alarm blared when I pushed through the emergency door, but I didn't care. I ran across the parking lot to my car, fumbled with my keys, and got inside. I was 3 blocks away before I realized I was sobbing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment with all the lights on, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A machine, photographs, Marcus appearing like he'd known I would be there. "You'll end up like them." Like who? The people in the photographs? I opened my laptop and searched for information about the Cascade Cinema. The building had been constructed in 1974, opened as a single-screen theater, and expanded in the 80s. It had changed ownership a few times, but had been independently operated for the last 15 years. Nothing unusual. No reports of accidents or mysterious disappearances. Just a normal small-town theater. I searched for Theater 6 and Cascade Cinema together. Nothing. I searched for disappearances in Ridgemont. A few results came up, but nothing recent or unusual for a town of 8,000 people. Whatever was happening at the Cascade, it wasn't common knowledge. Around 6 a.m., I made a decision. I would quit. I'd send Paul an email, tell him I was leaving for personal reasons, and never go back to that building. I started typing the email, but I couldn't finish it. Because as much as I wanted to run, I couldn't stop thinking about those photographs, about the blurred people, about the machine. And I kept hearing Marcus's words, "You'll end up like them." Someone needed to know about this. The police, maybe, or a reporter. But what would I tell them? That I'd broken into my workplace at 1 a.m. and found a mysterious machine in a basement room? That there were photographs of people who looked blurred? I had no evidence. I'd been trespassing. And Marcus had warned me to keep quiet. I spent Sunday in a haze of exhaustion and fear, jumping at every sound, checking the locks on my doors repeatedly. Monday came and went. I didn't hear from Paul or anyone else at the Cascade. Tuesday was my next scheduled shift. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot at 5:30, staring at nothing, trying to decide. If I didn't show up, I'd lose the job. I needed the money. And maybe Marcus had been bluffing. Maybe I could just keep my head down, do my work, and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Maybe. I drove to the Cascade and arrived at 6. Inside, everything was normal. Stephanie was at concessions. Janet was at the box office. Paul was in his office. I clocked in. Stephanie smiled at me. "Hey, good weekend?" "Yeah, you?" "Mostly studied, got an exam Thursday?" Normal conversation, normal shift. I helped with concessions during the evening rush, such as it was. Cleaned theaters between showings. Avoided the hallway that led to Theater 6. At 8:30, Paul called me into his office. I went, my stomach tight. He was sitting at his desk, looking at his computer. He gestured for me to close the door. I did. "Marcus told me you were down in the basement the other night," Paul said without looking at me. I didn't respond. That was incredibly stupid. He finally turned to face me. "Do you understand what you risked?" "I didn't touch anything, I just looked." "That's not the point." He rubbed his face, suddenly looking much older than his 50s. "You have no idea what you saw down there?" "So tell me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you need this job?" "What?" "How much do you need this job?" he repeated. "Could you find something else?" "Probably not around here. Not that pays the same." He nodded slowly. "Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep working here. You're going to do your job exactly as you've been doing it. You're never going to go into Theater 6 again. You're never going to talk about what you saw in the basement. And you're going to forget this conversation ever happened." "I can't just..." "Yes, you can." His voice was harder now. "Because the alternative is that you quit tonight, and we make sure you don't talk about what you saw." The threat was implicit, but clear. "Is that legal?" I asked. Paul almost smiled. "None of this is about legal. This is about you staying safe, about keeping your job, about not asking questions that have answers you really don't want to know. People deserve to know." "Know what?" he interrupted. "What would you even tell them? That we have a machine in the basement, that we take photographs? You don't know what any of it means. You don't know what it's for. And trust me when I say you're better off not knowing." I stared at him. "You're part of this." "I manage a theater. That's all I do." "Who are the people in the photographs?" He didn't answer. "Paul, who are they?" "People who watched movies in Theater 6. He turned back to his computer. "You need to decide right now. Stay and keep quiet, or leave and take your chances." I thought about the blurred faces, the dark stains on the seats in some photographs. "What happens to people who watch movies in Theater 6? I asked quietly. Paul's hands hovered over his keyboard. For a moment I thought he might actually answer. Then he said, "Go back to work." I left the office. My hands were shaking. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm down. I needed to think. Paul had basically confirmed that something happened to people in Theater 6, but he'd also made it clear that talking about it would have consequences, and I had no proof of anything. If I went to the police, what would I say? Even if they believed me enough to investigate, Paul could claim the machine was old projection equipment. The photographs could be explained away as some kind of art project or historical record. I'd just look crazy. Unless I got evidence. The thought terrified me. But it was the only option that made sense. If I could get photographs of the machine, of the pictures on the wall, maybe even some kind of documentation about what the machine did, then I'd have something real to show people. I returned to work in a daze, barely aware of what I was doing. Stephanie noticed. "You okay?" she asked during a lull. "You seem out of it." "Just tired." She studied me for a moment. "Be careful," she said quietly. "What?" "Just be careful." Before I could ask what she meant, a customer approached the concession stand, and the moment passed. The rest of the shift was uneventful. I cleaned theaters, avoided Paul, and left as soon as I finished. But as I drove home, I was already planning my next move. I needed to get back into that basement. I needed photographs, and I needed to do it without getting caught. Over the next few days, I formulated a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the best I could come up with. The Cascade had security cameras, but they were mostly focused on the lobby and the concession area. The hallways and auditoriums weren't monitored, presumably because there was nothing worth stealing back there. I'd confirmed this by watching where Paul and Tom looked when they checked the security feeds. They only ever pulled up views of the front of the building. So if I could get into Theater 6 and down to the basement during a regular shift, while I was supposed to be cleaning, I might be able to avoid detection. The risk was running into Marcus or one of the managers. But I've been working at the Cascade long enough to know the patterns. Marcus usually left by 10. Tom or Paul would be in the office doing paperwork. If I was quick, I could get down to the basement, take some pictures with my phone, and get back out. Thursday night seemed like the best opportunity. Paul was managing, and he usually stayed in his office until close. Marcus had left early the past 2 Thursdays. I came to work with my phone fully charged, wearing clothes with deep pockets. The evening proceeded normally. Small crowd, routine work. I kept my head down and waited. At 9:45, Marcus's car left the parking lot. Paul was in his office with the door closed. Stephanie had gone home. Janet didn't work Thursdays. I was alone in the front of the building. I told myself this was a terrible idea, that I should just quit and move on with my life. But I grabbed my phone, walked down the hallway, and stopped in front of Theater 6. The master key was still in my pocket. I'd meant to return it, but somehow I never had. I unlocked the door and slipped inside. The auditorium was dark. I didn't turn on any lights, just used my phone's flashlight to navigate. Down the aisle, through the door behind the screen, into the backstage area. The metal door to the basement stood ahead of me. I opened it and descended the stairs. The fluorescent lights were on, humming in that same irregular pattern. The thumping sound from the machine echoed up the hallway. I reached the door with the window and looked through. The machine was running just like before. The photographs still covered the walls. I tried the door. Unlocked. I stepped inside. The room was colder than the hallway. Cold enough that I could see my breath. The machine dominated the center of the space, its various components moving in slow, precise rotations. Up close, I could see more details. The control panel had dials and switches, some labeled with words I didn't recognize. The glass section showed something inside, shapes that moved and shifted, too quick to make out clearly. I raised my phone and started taking pictures. The machine from different angles, the control panel, the cables running across the floor. Then I turned to the walls and photographed the pictures. Looking at them more carefully now, I realized they weren't just random snapshots. They were organized by date, written in small, neat handwriting at the bottom of each cluster. The oldest ones I could see were from 1978. The most recent were from 2 weeks ago, the showing I'd seen marked on the calendar. In the oldest photographs, the people were clearer. You could make out faces, clothing, expressions. But as the dates progressed, the people became more and more indistinct. By the 90s, they were just blurred shapes, and in the most recent photos, the seats appeared empty except for dark stains. I photographed as many of the pictures as I could moving around the room. That's when I noticed the filing cabinets against the far wall. I crossed to them and opened the top drawer. Files, dozens of them, organized alphabetically. Each file had a name on the tab. I pulled one out at random. Inside was a photograph of a person, a middle-aged man smiling at the camera. Below the photo was information: height, weight, age, address, and below that a date and a single word: processed. I felt sick. I pulled out another file, a woman in her 30s, same format, same word at the bottom. These were records of people who'd watched movies in Theater 6. I started photographing the files, flipping through them as quickly as I could. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the files back into the cabinet and looked around for a place to hide. There was nowhere. The room was open except for the machine and the cabinets. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I moved behind the machine, crouching down, trying to make myself as small as possible. The door opened. Through the gaps in the machine's components, I could see someone enter. Paul. He walked to the control panel and studied it for a moment. Then he pressed a series of buttons. The machine's thumping slowed, then stopped. In the sudden quiet, I tried not to breathe. Paul stood there for a long moment, looking at the photographs on the wall. "I know you're in here," he said quietly. I didn't move. I saw the door to Theater 6 was unlocked. Marcus always locks it, Tom always locks it, I always lock it. He paused. "So it had to be you?" I stayed frozen behind the machine. "This is disappointing," Paul continued. "I gave you a chance. I warned you." He started walking around the machine slowly, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. "You want to know what this is?" he asked. "What it does?" I couldn't run. He was between me and the door. "It's a lens," Paul said. "Very special lens. It sees things normal cameras can't see. It captures something beyond the physical." He was getting closer. "Every person who watches a film in Theater 6 gets recorded, not their image. Something deeper. Their consciousness, maybe. Their soul, if you believe in that." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "The machine preserves it, stores it." He was almost to my hiding spot. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul stopped. "Because we were asked to, because we're paid very well to provide this service. Because the alternative was losing the theater, and I've worked here for 20 years. Who asked you? People who understand what this machine does. People who have uses for what it captures." He resumed walking. You weren't supposed to know about any of this. You were supposed to clean theaters and go home and live your normal life. He reached the side of the machine where I was hiding. Our eyes met. Now you've made things complicated, he said. I ran. I didn't think about it, just bolted toward the door. Paul grabbed for me, but I was faster. I made it through the door into the hallway and up the stairs. Behind me, I heard him following, but not running, just walking, calmly, like he knew I had nowhere to go. I burst into the backstage area, through the auditorium, and into the hallway. The front entrance was to my left. I ran toward it. Marcus stepped out of Theater 4, blocking my path. I skidded to a stop. Easy, Marcus said, holding up his hands. Nobody wants to hurt you. I turned to run the other way. Tom emerged from the lobby. I was trapped. Paul walked out of Theater 6, closing the door behind him. Let's talk in my office, he said. They didn't grab me or threaten me. They just walked, and I walked with them because there was nowhere else to go. In the office, Paul sat behind his desk. Marcus and Tom stood by the door. I sat in the chair opposite Paul. You took pictures? Paul said. I need your phone. I didn't move. Please, he added. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. What are you going to do to me? I asked. Paul sighed. That depends on you. If you give me your phone, delete any cloud backups, and promise to never speak about what you saw, then nothing. You quit tonight, we give you 2 weeks severance, and you leave town. And if I don't, then we put you in Theater 6, Marcus said quietly. We run the machine, and you become part of the collection. I looked at each of them. Paul looked tired. Tom looked uncomfortable. Marcus looked resigned. They meant it. Who are the people in those photographs? I asked. Volunteers mostly, Paul said. People who were paid to participate in an experiment. Some of them were desperate. Some were curious. A few were people who asked too many questions. That's murder. It's not murder. They're still alive, just somewhere else. The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. I'll give you my phone, I said. I'll delete everything, I'll leave. But I need to understand one thing first. Paul waited. Why? What's the point of capturing people's consciousness or whatever? What do they do with it? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know. I've never asked. I just maintain the machine and arrange the showings. You don't care? I care about keeping this theater open. I care about paying my mortgage. I care about the people who work here. He leaned forward. What I don't care about is the philosophical implications of technology I don't understand. Maybe that makes me a coward. I can live with that. I pulled out my phone and set it on the desk. Paul took it, opened the photos, and deleted everything from the past week. Then he went into the settings and disabled all cloud backups. You have any other devices? He asked. Computer at home? Tablet? No, just the phone. He studied me, trying to determine if I was lying. Then he handed the phone back. You're done here. Don't come back. Don't talk to anyone about what you saw. Just leave Ridgemont and start over somewhere else. And you'll leave me alone? As long as you keep quiet. I stood up. I quit. Smart choice, Paul said. I walked out of the office, through the lobby, and out the front doors. The parking lot was dark. Rain had started to fall again. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, shaking. Then I drove home. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in my apartment thinking about everything I'd seen. The machine, the photographs, the files. I thought about going to the police. but I had no evidence. And Paul had made it clear what would happen if I talked. I thought about leaving Ridgemont immediately. But I had a lease, a life, such as it was. Mostly I thought about the blurred faces in those photographs. The people who'd sat in Theater 6 and watched a movie and then, what? Where were they now? Were they really somewhere else, like Paul had said? Or was that just something he told himself to sleep at night? Over the next week, I applied to jobs in other towns. I started packing my apartment. I told my landlord I'd be breaking my lease. I didn't go back to the Cascade, but I drove past it sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep. I'd park across the street and look at the building. It looked normal, just an old movie theater in a small town. But I knew what was in the basement. I knew about Theater 6, and I knew I was going to carry that knowledge for the rest of my life. 3 weeks after I quit, I got a job offer in a city 4 hours away. Not great pay, but enough. I took it. The day before I left Ridgemont, I drove past the Cascade one last time. The marquee was advertising new releases. A few cars sat in the parking lot. People were inside, buying tickets, getting popcorn, watching movies. Normal. I thought about stopping. About going inside and trying one more time to do something, to warn someone, but I didn't. I kept driving. That was 6 months ago. I'm in a new city now, new job, new apartment. I don't work in movie theaters anymore. I don't go to movie theaters at all, actually. Sometimes I search online for news from Ridgemont, looking for reports of disappearances or police investigations or anything that might indicate someone else discovered what's in the basement of the Cascade. Nothing. The town carries on. The theater stays open. I've thought about posting my story online. But without evidence, who would believe it? And if Paul or Marcus or whoever's really in charge of that machine found out I'd talked, I don't know if they could find me. I don't know how far their reach extends, but I'm not willing to risk finding out. So I stay quiet. I go to work. I live my life. And I try not to think about Theater 6. But late at night, when I'm alone in the dark, I remember the sound of that machine. The rhythmic thumping. The mechanical whir. I remember the photographs on the wall. The faces that started clear and became blurred and finally disappeared entirely, leaving only stains. I remember Marcus's words. You'll end up like them. And I wonder if I made the right choice. If staying silent makes me complicit in whatever's happening in that basement. If there were people I could have saved by speaking up, even without evidence. I'll never know. What I do know is this. There's a small town cinema in Ridgemont with one screening room employees are never allowed to clean. And if you ever find yourself in that theater, if someone tries to sell you a ticket to a private showing in Theater 6, don't go. Whatever they're offering, money, curiosity, entertainment, it's not worth it. Because the movie ends, but you don't leave. Not really. I think about that sometimes. About what it must be like to be recorded by that machine, to have your consciousness or soul or whatever it is captured and stored and sent somewhere for purposes you'll never understand. Do you know what's happening? Are you aware? Are you screaming in some space beyond normal reality, unable to make anyone hear you? Or is it peaceful? Do you just fade? Does consciousness dissolve like fog in sunlight until there's nothing left to be afraid of? I don't know. And the not knowing is its own kind of horror. I've started having dreams about the Cascade. In them, I'm back in the building after closing. The hallways stretch longer than they should. The emergency lighting turns everything the color of blood. I walk toward Theater 6. I always know I shouldn't, but I can't stop myself. The door opens before I reach it. Inside, the seats are full of people, but they're not watching the screen. They're watching me. Their faces are blurred, indistinct, like photographs that didn't quite develop correctly, and they're all smiling. I always wake up before I see what's on the screen. Last week, I got a letter forwarded from my old address in Ridgemont. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with a date written in red ink. Next, Saturday. I threw the letter away. I'm not going back. They can't make me go back. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that date. I think about what it means. Are they expecting me? Have they scheduled a showing in Theater 6 with my name on it? Or is it a reminder, a warning that they haven't forgotten about me, that my silence has a price that might someday come due? I don't know. I just know that I keep my doors locked now. I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize, and I've stopped driving at night because I'm afraid that if I'm out after dark, I'll see a car following me, and it will follow me somewhere quiet. And someone will step out, Paul or Marcus or Tom or someone I've never seen before, and they'll smile in that too calm way, and they'll say it's time to watch a movie. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone. Because if something happens to me, if I disappear, if my story suddenly changes, if I start telling people I made everything up, then at least this will exist. Some record of what I saw. The Cascade Cinema in Ridgemont still operates. It's a real place. You can look it up, you can buy tickets, you can watch movies there. But don't ask about Theater 6. Don't notice if someone tells you it's closed for a private event. Don't wonder why certain employees seem nervous when you ask about the basement. And if you're ever looking for work, if you see a listing for a closing shift at a small town movie theater, if the pay seems too good and the managers ask too few questions, walk away. Some jobs aren't worth it. Some questions shouldn't be answered, and some doors should stay locked. I learned that too late. I saw what was behind the door. I know what waits in the basement, beneath Theater 6. And now I live with that knowledge, waiting to see if my silence was enough. Waiting to see if they'll leave me alone, or if eventually, inevitably, they'll come to collect what they think they're owed. The date on that letter is 3 days away. I'm not going to Ridgemont. I'm going to stay here in my apartment with the doors locked and the lights on, but I keep thinking about something Paul said. They're still alive, just somewhere else. Where? Where do you go when the machine in the basement of the Cascade captures whatever makes you you? What does it feel like? Is it instantaneous? Or do you feel yourself being pulled away from your body, from the physical world, from everything you've ever known? And who receives what the machine captures? Who's on the other end of this transaction? I'll never know the answers. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some truths are too terrible to understand. All I know is that somewhere in America, in a small town you've probably never heard of, there's a movie theater with a secret. And that secret has been kept for decades by ordinary people who tell themselves they're just doing their jobs. People like Paul, who claims not to care about the philosophical implications. People like Marcus, who watches and warns and guards. People like Stephanie and Janet and Tom, who've learned not to see what they're not supposed to see. And for a few weeks, people like me. I was part of it. I cleaned the theaters, I worked the concession stand, I walked past Theater 6 and pretended not to notice the inconsistencies and the strangeness. I told myself I needed the job, that it wasn't my business, that someone else would deal with it. That makes me complicit, doesn't it? Even now, staying silent, I'm complicit. But what choice do I have? Without evidence, I'm just someone telling a crazy story. With evidence, I'm a target. So I live in this space between speaking and silence, between guilt and self-preservation. And I wait. Saturday is coming. The date on the letter is coming. And I don't know what happens when it arrives. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just a warning, and my silence has bought me peace. Or maybe it was an invitation I can't refuse. Maybe the machine in the basement of the Cascade has already marked me. Maybe distance doesn't matter. Maybe wherever I go, whatever I do, I'm already part of the collection. Maybe I have been since the first time I walked into Theater 6. I hope not. I hope I'm just paranoid, traumatized by what I saw, imagining threats that don't exist. But late at night, in the moment between waking and sleep, I sometimes feel something. A pull, like gravity, but not physical. Like something's tugging at a part of me I can't name, trying to drag it somewhere I can't imagine. And in those moments, I wonder if I'm still entirely here. If part of me is already somewhere else. If the machine doesn't need me to return to Theater 6 because it captured something the first time I entered. The thought terrifies me. But I can't prove it's true. I can't prove any of this is true. All I have are memories and questions, and a date written in red ink. 3 days. If you're reading this after Saturday, then I'm okay. I survived whatever that letter meant. I can keep living with what I know. But if you're reading this, and you've heard that someone from Ridgemont went missing, or if my social media goes dark, or if anyone asks and I deny that any of this ever happened, then you'll know. You'll know the machine in the basement of the Cascade Cinema claimed another person. You'll know that Theater 6 is still operating. And you'll know that some places in this world have doors that should never be opened, rooms that should never be entered, and machines that should never be turned on. But they are. They are opened and entered and turned on by ordinary people in ordinary buildings for reasons that probably made sense to someone once. And the rest of us walk past, buying our tickets, eating our popcorn, watching our movies, never knowing what's happening one floor down, never asking why we're never allowed to clean certain rooms, never wondering about the people who watched a movie and never came home. The Cascade Cinema is still open, still showing films, still operating the machine. And I'm still here for now, telling you this story, telling you to stay away, telling you that some jobs aren't worth it, some secrets are kept for terrible reasons, and some small towns hide things that should never be found. Ridgemont, population 8,000. One of them used to be me. I hope I stay that way. I hope Saturday passes without incident. I hope the pull I feel late at night is just my imagination. But hope isn't certainty. And certainty is something I lost the night I broke into Theater 6 and saw what waits in the darkness beneath an ordinary movie theater. So I'm writing this down. I'm putting it out into the world, and I'm hoping it's enough. Hoping that telling this story, even without proof, even without the ability to stop what's happening, counts for something. Maybe it will save someone. Maybe someone will read this and recognize the warning signs and walk away from their own version of the Cascade. Or maybe it won't matter. Maybe the machines are everywhere, in small towns and big cities, in movie theaters and office buildings, and places we'd never think to look. Maybe we're all already in the collection, already captured, already somewhere else. Maybe the world we think we're living in is just an echo of something that ended a long time ago. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore, except that I should have quit the first day, should have Walked away when Paul told me not to worry about Theater 6. Should have trusted my instincts when I heard those footsteps in the empty hallway. But I didn't. And now I'm here, counting down to Saturday, wondering what it means, hoping I'll be okay, hoping I'm still entirely myself, hoping the machine doesn't already have me. 3 days? Then I'll know. Or I won't know anything at all. Either way, this is my story, my warning, my confession. The Cascade Cinema had one screening room employees were never allowed to clean. I found out why. And I wish to God I hadn't.